It's the end of an era for us American anime fans. In a few short days, Funimation's online services will be terminated, and the company as we know it will cease to exist. I'm really at a loss of words here. After all, Funimation has been an integral part of my anime experience since the very beginning. This is going to be a little different from my usual style of reviewing anime. It's not really a review, but a discussion and obituary of the 30-year history of a company I have been following in some form since its inception. Funimation, for the longest time, was the premier distributor for a lot of my favorite anime shows, starting all the way back with Dragon Ball Z and as recent as Spy Family. And with the company closing down with its merger into Crunchyroll finally complete on April 3rd, 2024, I feel the need to discuss the history of this influential company that has been a major part of my anime experience. And since this is the year of the Dragon Ball, talking about the history of Funimation fits, since without this company, Dragon Ball Z would never have been as popular as it was over here. Before Funimation took prominence, early anime fandom in the United States was a difficult venture. Sure, you had shows like Astro Boy, Speed Racer, Battle of the Planets, Star Blazers, and Robotech. But anime in the United States was still made for an extremely specific audience. In the United States, the anime fandom community began as an offshoot of the science fiction fan community, with fans bringing imported copies of anime to conventions. Before anime began to be licensed in the US, fans who wanted to get a hold of anime would have to leak third-hand copies of anime movies on VHS and subtitle them themselves. Unless you were lucky enough to have cable TV, the only way to enjoy anime at that time was through bootlegs passed around during conventions. So yeah, piracy was a major part of the anime industry in America from the very beginning. Where does Dragon Ball fit in this story before Funimation took prominence in the American anime market? In 1989, Harmony Gold produced a partial dub of the first 5 TV episodes of Dragon Ball and 2 movies which were edited into an 80-minute film. The dubs were pitched to independent television stations, but the show was quickly canceled as it failed to acquire an audience. That would all begin to change with the release of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in 1993. Oddly enough, the huge success from Power Rangers led to a renewed interest in Japanese media overseas, hoping to replicate the success that Power Rangers had. For example, DiC Entertainment would release Sailor Moon on terrestrial broadcast television in the United States, which also failed to catch on at the time. Enter a Japanese-born American engineer and entrepreneur named Gen Fukunaga. After Harmony Gold's failed attempt to bring the Dragon Ball franchise to television via first-run syndication, he was approached by his uncle Nagafumi Hori, who was working as a producer for Toei Films. It was suggested that if they would raise enough money to start their own production company, they could find a way to bring the Dragon Ball franchise to the United States. Thus, the company was founded on May 9th, 1994 as Funimation Productions. Hoping to duplicate their success from Power Rangers, Saban Entertainment teamed up with Funimation and Vancouver, Canada-based Ocean Productions to bring both Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z to the United States. However, like I mentioned in my review of Dragon Ball, both shows were aired in a very early morning time slot and heavily censored due to their violent content. Because of this, they failed to gain an audience and were quietly cancelled. The original Dragon Ball only lasted 13 episodes, while Dragon Ball Z fared a little bit better by running for the equivalent of 2 seasons and ending shortly after the defeat of the Ginyu Force. But there is a major new player in all of this, the rise and prominence of cable TV. In the mid to late 1990s, cable television became a lot more commonplace as nearly 50% of American households had cable TV at the time. Even in the early days, anime was a lot more suited for cable TV, especially since cable TV didn't have nearly as many restrictions than those that terrestrial TV did. Films like Akira and Ghost in the Shell could be found on channels like HBO and Cinemax. Meanwhile, shows like Mysterious Cities of Gold, Grimm's Fairy Tale Classics, and Adventures of the Little Koala aired on Nickelodeon in the 1980s. But anime on cable television would not rise to prominence until the mid-1990s, with the advent of Turner Broadcasting's Cartoon Network launching on October 1st, 1992. A few years after launching, after the success of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, Cartoon Network set out to find programs suitable for their new action animation block in order to appeal to a slightly older demographic. That action animation block would be known as Toonami. Dragon Ball Z was one of those programs that was picked up, premiering on the programming block on August 31st, 1998. The show originally aired reruns from the show's days in first-run syndication. Unlike its initial run, they were able to get widespread television exposure through the Toonami programming block, and Dragon Ball Z quickly became the highest-rated show on that programming block and garnered a large following. Actually, I take that back. It didn't just garner a huge following, it blew up. Dragon Ball Z quickly became the headlining series for the programming block for many years and is credited for allowing Funimation to acquire hundreds of other licensed anime titles over the years. It not only renewed interest in Japanese media in the United States, but it proved that Japanese animation can be marketable in the United States. As a result, multiple media companies would grow into this rapidly expanding market. ADV Films, 4Kids Entertainment, Central Park Media, Pioneer, Viz Media, and many others. But Funimation was different compared to most of them. So what made Funimation stand out against all the other American anime distributors at the time? Well, it all comes down to localization. When it came to dubbed anime into English and translation accuracy, the results were skewed at the least. The problem back then was changing the material to appeal to Western children audiences. In Japan, the rules and regulations regarding children's television are a lot looser than they are in the United States, so things like violence, swearing, and sexual innuendo were much more common in Japanese children's programming. Obviously, that would mean that in order to show popular anime in the United States, some of these shows had to be significantly altered in order to be shown on American broadcast television. Some of the more egregious examples could be found in shows like 4Kids Entertainment's treatment of One Piece that forced the removal of entire story arcs, creating plot holes by writing out the deaths of major characters, and turning weapons of all sorts into literal toys. Yeah, the changes that American anime distributors had to make to show these programs on American TV were that bad that they altered the original show entirely into something else. That is where Funimation set itself apart from other anime distributors in the US. The company quickly set itself up as the go-to place for uncensored, premium quality English dubs for anime. Because of that, Funimation quickly grew into the largest anime distributor in North America at that time. Most people looking for English dubbed anime were sure to see their logo at some point for how prolific their dubs were. Their distribution deal with Cartoon Network also expanded into other programming blocks for the channel, namely Adult Swim in 2003, and Funimation had major hits on their hands with shows like Detective Conan and Full Metal Alchemist. But with success and time comes change, and it would not take long for Funimation to experience its first major shakeup. Yeah, Funimation is about to be bought out. In 2005, Funimation was acquired by the Navarre Corporation, an American public distribution and publishing company founded in 1983 by Eric H. Paulson. As part of the acquisition, Gen Fukunaga was retained as head of the company, transitioning to the position of CEO, and the company's name was changed from Funimation Productions to Funimation Entertainment. During Navarre's ownership of Funimation, Funimation Entertainment, along with Olympus Sat, launched the Funimation channel on September 29, 2005. Among these changes during this time, Funimation moved from North Richland Hills, Texas, to Flower Mound, Texas in 2007. Also at this time, Funimation's legal department began to pursue a more aggressive approach towards protecting the company's licensed properties, even ones that seemingly did not have any connections with Funimation at the time. Sharing unlicensed titles in the US via torrenting became popular at the time, which allowed the transfer of larger files as a preferred method of gaining access to more recent shows from Japan through fan subs, an unauthorized copy distributed with fan-produced and translated subtitles. It's a legally questionable practice, but it was the only way to gain access to viewing many popular shows that were airing in Japan at the time. American fans of a show would often have to wait up to 2 years for an anime show currently airing in Japan to be licensed, translated, dubbed into English, and distributed onto store shelves, which were not always readily available. Torrenting anime, on the other hand, was quicker, easier, more readily available, and most importantly, cheaper. The practice would become even more commonplace with what was to happen to the American anime market a year later that would leave the licenses of many popular anime shows in doubt. And let's not forget that pirating anime has been the major part of the American anime experience for the longest time. The technology has just simply evolved. The North American anime industry was hit with the financial crisis of 2008, which led to a long recession in the economy lasting for years. During this time, Pioneer Geneon, Central Park Media, and ADV Films folded and liquidated their assets. During their closures, many of their former licenses were transferred over to Funimation with the exclusive rights to their manufacturing, marketing, sales, and distribution. However, some behind-the-scenes legal shenanigans led Funimation to sue John Ledford and Section 23 Films, the owners of Sentai Filmworks, over breach of contract in regard to a debt ADV owed ARM Corporation in 2011. As a result of its shuttering, ADV lost the rights to more than 30 anime properties, so in July of 2008, Funimation and ARM announced that they had reached a distribution agreement for those properties by making Funimation a creditor. Sentai Filmworks then countersued Funimation in return that their legal disputes were not valid. Instead, they sold their assets for below market price to several companies owned by former ADV executives and then shut down. This quickly became a long, nasty legal battle for many years. Which is sad because many of those companies have been around a lot longer than Funimation did. ADV Films and Central Park Media in particular have been around since the very early 90s. Funimation suddenly found itself owning a majority stake of the American anime market, with only Viz Media and a few others left, leaving some to consider what would happen if Funimation itself shut down or gained a near monopoly on the American anime market. Yeah, the warning signs of things to come for an anime distributor as large as Funimation. 5 years later, on May 27, 2010, Navarre Corporation announced that it began negotiating a potential sale of Funimation. Navarre released a statement announcing that Funimation had been sold to a group of investors that included the original owner, Gen Fukunaga, for $24 million. It was also announced that Navarre would remain as exclusive distributor of Funimation's titles. Funimation once again returned to being an independent organization, this time with major financial backing. On February 18, 2012, Funimation announced that it would launch its video streaming app, later renamed Funimation Now. Let me tell you, the Funimation streaming website throughout its service history was a mess, difficult to navigate, and frequently crashed when I tried to use it. Funimation also acquired a distribution deal with Nico Nico, the short-lived English language version of Nico Nico Doga. From this point on, virtually all titles simulcasted by Nico Nico were acquired by Funimation. In June of 2015, Funimation Entertainment and Universal Pictures Home Entertainment would also reach an exclusive multi-year distribution services agreement. Universal would also manage the distribution of Funimation's entire DVD and Blu-ray portfolio. Universal saw an interest in purchasing Funimation in 2017, but ultimately backed down in a bidding war that favored Sony. So, on July 31st, 2017, Sony Pictures Television announced that it would buy a controlling 95% stake in Funimation for $143 million. This deal allowed Funimation to have synergies with Sony's Animax and Kid Stations divisions and a direct access to the creative pipeline. This means that Funimation is now owned by Sony, who is seemingly hell-bent on creating absolute control over the American anime market with the purchase of Funimation's biggest competitor at the time, Crunchyroll. And the end of Funimation is nigh. Behold the woke years. This is where I would point out the beginning of Funimation's decline, not only in the performances, but in quality, in writing, and pretty much all other aspects in production. Simply put, under Sony's ownership, Funimation would quickly become a woke leftist company. There were multiple reports of political infighting between staff, and the company began making alterations to the dialogue in their shows to be more politically correct. These dialogue changes with woke terminology were not only cringe or made little sense, but they altered the original meaning of entire scenes in some cases. That's not what anime fans pay for or want. We want the English dubs to be as faithful and accurate to the Japanese version as possible. There is no better example than this line in Prison School.
Have you got a stick up your ass? Or are you one of those dumbass Gamergate creep shows?
Or this one from Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid.
What are you wearing that for?
Oh, those pesky patriarchal societal demands were getting on my nerves, so I changed clothes.
Give it a week, they'll be begging you to change back.
Arbitrary changes were made even in earlier dubs, like the dated American pop culture jokes in Crayon Shin-chan, the seemingly random swearing in Hetalia Axis Powers, and changing all of the character names from Japanese to English ones in Detective Conan. And yes, I understand that the name changes were done because the Japanese version of Detective Conan actually uses the names of real people and places in the show, as well as loosely fictionalized accounts of actual police cases. And if you thought you could get away from all that by watching subtitles, in Kaguya-sama Love is War, an episode included lines about social distancing that was released during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Even if those lines were made by Aniplex, it was still under the distribution deal between Aniplex and Funimation. So now how can fans trust Funimation to give the correct translations and not whatever the writer thought was funny or added in simply for personal political clout? Perhaps I judged you too harshly. So at this point, they have become the very thing they swore to destroy. To throw salt on an open wound, some members of Funimation staff were caught on video openly insulting concerned fans during Q&A panels at conventions and picking fights with them on Twitter. Needless to say that the ill treatment of fans and forcing of political biases into the English dub's dialogue destroyed a lot of goodwill and faith in the company. Worse was the controversy surrounding a prominent anime voice actor named Vic Mignogna. In early 2019, shortly after the release of Dragon Ball Super Broly, allegations of sexual misconduct were brought up against the voice actor, with some allegations dating back to when his career began in 1989. A little bit of my own opinions here, but I found the allegations mostly unfounded as hearsay and baseless. Looking at the allegations in a broader sense, Vic Mignogna was essentially thrown under the bus by Funimation to cover their asses at the peak of the Me Too movement. Plus, there were rumors that Funimation wanted to get rid of him for a while, and the circumstances provided a perfect chance to do so. But one of the other allegations I have heard from voice talents who have worked with him in the past, like Sean Schemmel and Chris Sabat, as well as others, was that Vic Mignogna was a perfectionist and was very difficult to work with. This seems more of a plausible reason to get rid of him, rather than having multiple women coming forward all at once to say he touched them inappropriately. Although physical displays of affection is a common practice in Italian culture, and Vic Mignogna was very passionate about his fans. Sometimes a little too passionate for comfort, but most of these situations that I have seen coming from him, he was asked to or given permission from the fan. Controversies aside, in 2016, Funimation and Crunchyroll announced plans to dub and distribute a number of their anime titles on home video. The partnership worked as if Crunchyroll would handle the online streaming services of the partnership, while Funimation would handle physical distribution as well as streaming their own dubbed content. This worked favorably for fans until August of 2020. Sony would acquire Crunchyroll after the merger between Warner Media and Discovery Inc. In August of 2022, Sony would also acquire the online merchandise store RightStuff.com and merge it into the Crunchyroll brand. Unfortunately, with the acquisition of both Crunchyroll and RightStuff.com, Funimation's usefulness to Sony has ended, as Funimation found itself as a third-party streamer and distributor in favor of Crunchyroll. Rather than sell the company and face competition from a viable competitor, Sony did what Sony does and instead liquidated and absorbed all of Funimation's assets to become Crunchyroll LLC in 2022. It was then announced in 2023 that after Crunchyroll's acquisition was complete, Funimation's online functions would be shuttered on April 3rd, 2024, with the option of Funimation's current subscribers to migrate over to Crunchyroll up until the official closure. Alongside the closure, fans would experience a huge loss of available anime, with over 200 anime titles that Funimation previously licensed ending up without a home and unavailable in the US. This is why I am very strongly a physical media kind of person, and this is why physical media is so important. So that is where we are today, and in a few days' time, Funimation as a company and a brand will cease to exist. There still is the Funimation channel, but I have a feeling that too will be shut down or also merged into Crunchyroll sooner rather than later. And it is a huge loss for someone like me who has been following and buying Funimation's anime catalog from the beginning with Dragon Ball Z. It feels like another piece of my childhood has faded away into history, like a lot of other things I have once cherished. But time is a trickster. First you have it, and then it is gone. Maybe one day, Funimation will return again in some fashion, but only time will tell for now. Until then, here is to the anime distribution company many of us American anime fans have stuck with for so very long, known as Funimation Entertainment. Well, that's enough at taking a look at the history of the American production company that brought Dragon Ball Z to the United States. Let's talk about a certain Dragon Ball movie that I really do not look forward to revisiting. Until next time, this is the American Anime Otaku signing out.